Shalom, everyone. In order to understand this chapter, which talks about emotions and intellect, I want to give an introduction as Rabbi Melamed talks about Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, but before him, his father, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and afterwards the first chief rabbi of the land of Israel. It was not called, well, it was called Palestine technically by the British, but he died in 1933, I believe. And so he says that there's four parts of each and every one of us soul. So the four parts are intellect, will, imagination, and feelings. And so each one of us has to balance those four powers in order for us to basically do what we're supposed to do. And I'll just go to the last one, which was imagination. The rabbis say, and it's not only in Rav Kook's writings, it's also in Maimonides and others, that the prophet has to use their imagination a lot more than the other three, because that's the only way that they'll be able to understand Hashem's message to them. And if you look in the first chapter of Jeremiah, Hashem asks Jeremiah in his very first conversation, he says, "What do you see?" And he said, I see a pot that is boiling and bubbling towards the north, or sorry, from the north. And so Hashem said to him, "You saw correctly. This is Babylon that will come from the north and will destroy the people of Israel." And the second vision was a almond tree branch, and I'm not sure how he recognized it, maybe the flowers, maybe the actual almonds, but Hashem said, "Yes, you have seen correctly." And the interpretation of this is that shoked ani al hara, that I'm going to do it quickly, like the almond tree blossoms, and very, very shortly afterwards gives fruit. By the way, the Talmud says that the fastest growing fruit tree is the cypress, not the one that we know today, which is part of the evergreen, but the cypress that produces the capers. From the minute that the flower opens until the capers are already starting, it's about 6 hours. And if you want to go and search that on YouTube, it's in slow motion. So obviously you're not going to watch 6 hours. They just show you the different stages in that process. But apparently the almond tree is from that same family, and also it develops very quickly from the minute that the flower bud appears. The one last thing, which is actually no, let's continue with Peninei, and then we'll go back to this explanation a little bit better, because it is the weekly parsha, and I wanted to share that about with you. So my teacher of Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the son of Rav Kook that I mentioned, regularly emphasized the principle that men and women are equal. However, after positing that key precept, he would occasionally dwell on the differences between men and women. The element of intellect is more discernible in men. By contrast, human emotion is more prominent in women. So this doesn't mean that women are less smart, like we tried to talk about yesterday. It just means that it's more prominent and more discernible in men, because men think in a very linear way, in a very mathematical way. They only understand, almost only understand, 1 + 1 = 2. John Gray wrote a whole series of books about this, and the very first book he wrote was called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And in that book, he actually says that when his wife asked him, when his wife told him that she's in pain after giving birth to their first child, he did not understand that what she was really saying was, "I need a hug." And so he didn't give her a hug, because you're in pain. Can I call the nurse, right? She doesn't need a nurse. She needs him to give her a hug, and that's that emotion. By contrast, human emotion is more prominent in women. So, women do feel. I think that all the jokes and stories that we heard about Hadassah women are 100% true because they feel that there's a need and they collect money immediately to be able to send it to those people. One of our community members was asked at the American border because there was no direct flight to Israel. She was asked if she has $10,000 in her possession, as that is the limit, but she wasn't asked if you only have $10,000. So she answered honestly, yes. She had a few $100,000 in her possession, which were all gathered from the Maritimes during the Yom Kippur War. Of course, men also have feelings and women are also intelligent, but in general, men incline more toward the intellect and women toward emotion. This approach has recently been reinforced by various research studies on the brain and mind, from which it emerges that were two or are two types of intelligence: intellectual, which is called IQ, and emotional EQ. As a result, sorry, went too far. As a result of this distinction, in certain areas the man is more active, whereas the woman is more passive. After the intellect arrives at conclusions, it produces and constructs. I'm a fix-it man, whereas emotion is characterized by perceiving impressions from surrounding events, but it doesn't always initiate them. Rather, it is impacted by them. Thus, we find that the Torah sages of earlier generations describe men as being more inclined to influence and women as being more apt to receive. And in the Zohar, it's even deeper than that, which is that the gever is the kli, the gever is the shefa, and the woman is the kli to receive it, the vessel to receive it. These two complementary traits allow us to connect wholly to the divine ideal, grow stronger in faith, live a Torah existence, and rectify the world under the Almighty's sovereignty. Though the analytical and discerning intellect through the analytical and discerning intellect, we establish the principles with which we govern our lives, and via spontaneous, raw emotion, we are able to better absorb the faith and vitality of the Torah. So again, men need to understand the actual logic of the Talmud, but women don't need to understand it. They just accept it as it is because they have more faith and they're more spiritual and they understand it at an emotional level. In the following paragraph, I will attempt to further refine this concept based on the words of Rav Kook and his son, Rav Tzvi Uda, which we talked about at the beginning. So for more, see Sichot HaRatzia, Bereshit, because that's where it starts, Bamidbar, etc. And so I'll conclude our halacha part today with this. But I wanted to share with you something that is very, very similar about the parsha, which Hashem tells Avraham that he should listen to Sarah because she knows better. And so, one second, I'll just bring up the page. So the Talmud in Masechet Megillah, which we mentioned yesterday, says the following, that there were 7 prophetesses: Sarah, Miriam, Devorah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther. And Sarah Imenu, our foremother, it says very clearly, Sarah nechshevet gdola me'Avram b'neviut, that she's greater from Abraham in prophecy, because it says the following: Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hashem Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of his of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Lo matzinu shediber makom im isha ela im Sarah bilvad. The only woman that Hashem ever spoke to directly, without an angel as an intermediate or anything like that, was Sarah. Even with Adam and Eve in the garden, Hashem spoke to Adam, and then he said, L'Sara Amar, but that's a one-way conversation. That's not called a conversation. It's Hashem said to Chava what the consequences of her deed were going to be. But Sarah was greater than Avram, and that's why in our parsha, when he marries Hagar and has a son with her, in order to be like a surrogate, which scientifically proven to actually help people have children. And there's a few very good TV shows that that have that theme in theirs. I'll just mention one. In Mike and Molly, they apply for adoption, and the minute that they are approved, she tells him, "I'm pregnant." So that's what Abraham and Sarah were trying to do. And when Sarah said, "Let's kick this maid out because she's pompous and mimicking me mocking me about the fact that I don't have a son," then Abraham is told by Hashem immediately, "Shema bekolah," listen to her voice. And so that's where the intellect and the emotion sometimes crash, but we have to realize that that's how Hashem created us. We'll stop here.